Welcome to the Abridged History of Southeast Alaska. You may know us as Canada's Hat, or that weird island off the coast of California. But in actuality, we're very, very big, and we're going to be talking about the Panhandle in particular. Now, this area, a long time ago, there were a lot of animals going around, but most importantly, there were no people until, bam, the Tlingits showed up, and they take over pretty much everywhere. Now, that worked out really well for them until, hello, it's the Haida, and actually, we'd really like that island, or most of it anyway. And soon enough, there's the Eyak to the north and the Tsimshian to the south, and everything's going pretty well. So now there's trading back and forth, including the Tlingit, who managed to trade 900 miles away from shore, which is pretty darn impressive. For the most part, it's a pretty good time to be Alaska Native in Alaska. Lots of art is being made, everyone's celebrating their culture, and nobody is bothering them. What could possibly go wrong? It's the late 1700s, and white people have shown up, specifically the Russians, and they're here to trade fur, which is good because we have a lot of fur to trade. So there's trading going back and forth, and it's going okay. It does mean the British want to show up and get in on the action, and so do the Americans. Surprise, surprise. Luckily, everyone looks fabulous, and the Russians are making money hand over fist. Which means it's now 1796, and Russia decides they're going to plant a flag and call it New Russia, which is super imaginative. 1799, they build a new fort called Fort St. Archangel Michael, which is a mouthful. It's the early 1800s, which means treating the locals terribly seems like a great plan. There's lots of boats in the area, especially the British, who keep whispering about, hey, how much do those Russians really not care about you? Would you like to buy our guns? Our alcohol. And the Russians were really upset about this, but it turns out that everyone was giving alcohol to the locals because that's one of the key steps in conquering a nation. It's like in their manifesto. They knew what they were doing. In fact, in 1802, things get so bad that the Tlingit rise up and burn down the fort. They built a new fort a little to the left and survived there for 2 years before Russia's like, no, and comes and there's a huge battle and the entire fort winds up burning. To add insult to injury, Russia's like, you know what would be a great place for a fort? Right here, and we're going to call it Sitka. Eventually, trade resumes, and Russia builds a whole bunch more forts, and then they decide to stick a flag in it, called dibs on the entire country. They pick Sitka as their capital because reasons. 1861, and we've got gold fever, which is good, except that this beautiful area of the Stikine River now looks like this. And on top of that, what we thought was gold is actually more like gold. 1867, what happens? America buys the Alaska Territory, which was really exciting, except not super exciting for the people who are actually living here. It means American flags all over the place, and a whole bunch of soldiers in the area, including one guy who wrote home saying how terrible it was that these Alaska natives had no Christian education. And the Presbyterians were like, yeah, we're super on that, and they decided that boarding schools were going to be a good idea. Even though they were terrible, even though they took kids from their homes and forbade them from speaking their language, and traumatized generations of Alaska natives. Now, though, it's 1880, which means gold, which means people like Joe Juneau showing up and putting his name on things, as you do. There's logging going on, there's canneries popping up, and for the most part, things were going pretty well. As long as you're not Alaska Native. Now, if you are and you live in a little place called Angoon, things are about to get really bad. When they were like, hey, could you maybe pay us the money owed to the families of the dead sailors on that one boat you blew up? The Navy was like, what if we blew up your town instead? Luckily, no one was there at the time, but it was leading into winter and a lot of people starved. No one apologized for 100 years. In 1898, we got more gold, but this time it's a big deal. Big enough deal to make Skagway and also to move our capital from Sitka to Juneau. It seemed like everyone in the whole world was trying to find their fortune in Alaska. So of course that worked out 100%. So it's 1914, and we've decided to stop gold mining because it's not worth it for the war effort. And anyway, the Navy has its hands full with fish piracy, which is a real thing. The population is vastly decreasing because everyone is either signing up for the Army or moving out of state to find long-term jobs, which just don't exist. Now, the good news is that the Roaring Twenties happened to everyone, and the fox furs had to come from somewhere, and a lot of them came from Southeast Alaska. So our economy was looking up until the 1930s when it was looking down. One of the best ideas the U.S. ever had was taking all of the people from the Aleutian Islands and evacuating them to the southeast. And did I say best idea because I meant worst? Anything with the phrase internment camp in it is a terrible idea. These people were kept in horrific conditions and many of them never saw their homes again. But slowly steps were made in regards to civil rights. In 1945, Tlingit activist Elizabeth Peradovich gave the decisive testimony that passed the Anti-Discrimination Act. And in 1956, Frank Peradovich was the only Alaska Native elected to the Constitutional Convention, though clearly there should have been more. It's a long, hard road Native Alaskans have had to get back in control of their lands and rights, and it's a battle still being fought today.